The sharp sting of betrayal burned in her chest as the words echoed through the sterile conference room. Effective immediately, your employment with this company is terminated. The voice was cold, clinical, a stark contrast to the hours she had poured into building something extraordinary for them. Across the table sat 3 executives who refused to meet her eyes, their faces masks of indifference. She clenched her fists under the table, nails digging into her palms, forcing herself not to scream or cry or throw something across the room. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Less than 48 hours ago, she'd been riding high on adrenaline, celebrating a deal that would change everything, for her, for the company, for everyone involved. A $2.4 million commission hung in the balance, dangling like bait at the edge of a cliff. And now? Now they were firing her before she could even cash the check. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unravel from behind a glass wall. Her name was Claire Monroe, though no one bothered to call her by it anymore. Not here. To these people, she was just another cog in the machine, easily replaceable, expendable. But what they didn't know, what none of them seemed willing to acknowledge, was that she wasn't just some faceless employee. She was the reason the deal existed in the first place. Every late night spent strategizing, every early morning phone call made halfway around the world, every ounce of sweat and sacrifice had led to this moment. And now, instead of gratitude, there was only silence. Claire stared at the termination letter lying on the polished mahogany table between them, its edges crisp and impersonal. Her mind raced back to the beginning, to the day she walked into this soulless corporate office with nothing but determination and a dream. Back then, she'd believed in the promise of hard work paying off, in loyalty being rewarded. How naive she'd been. It started 2 years earlier, when Claire joined the company as an account executive. At 34, she was older than most of her peers, but experience had taught her things they couldn't learn in business school. She knew how to read people, how to spot opportunity where others saw obstacles. Her first few months were unremarkable, cold calls, endless meetings, quotas to meet, but deep down, she sensed there was more waiting for her if she dug deep enough. Then came the client. He called himself Mr. Langley, though Claire suspected it wasn't his real name. He reached out one rainy afternoon, his voice smooth and deliberate over the phone. "I hear you're the best," he said without preamble. "Prove it." For weeks, Claire chased him, navigating layers of gatekeepers and cryptic emails until finally, she secured a meeting. When they sat down together in a dimly lit cafe downtown, he laid out his vision, a partnership unlike anything the industry had ever seen. It was bold, ambitious, borderline impossible, but Claire thrived on challenges. By the time their coffee cups were empty, she was hooked. What followed was a whirlwind of negotiations, presentations, and sleepless nights. Claire worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of energy into making Langley's vision a reality. She built bridges where none existed, brokered deals that left seasoned veterans scratching their heads, and somehow managed to keep the entire operation running smoothly despite constant setbacks. Along the way, she earned a reputation as a force to be reckoned with, a woman who didn't take no for an answer and always delivered results. But success came at a cost. Friends stopped inviting her to dinners because she was perpetually tied up with work. Family gatherings became rare occurrences, squeezed into weekends when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Even her apartment began to feel foreign, its walls bearing witness to countless lonely nights spent hunched over spreadsheets and contracts. Still, Claire told herself it would all be worth it in the end. Sacrifices were necessary. Hardships were temporary. Victory was inevitable. And then, just as she thought she'd crossed the finish line, disaster struck. The boardroom erupted in chaos the moment the news broke. Rumors flew faster than anyone could verify facts, spreading panic throughout the office. Someone whispered about legal trouble, another mentioned a breach of contract. Whatever the truth was, Claire found herself caught in the crossfire. Accusations flew left and right, each one more absurd than the last. Some accused her of incompetence, others claimed she'd sabotaged the deal intentionally. Through it all, Claire remained silent, knowing full well that defending herself would only make matters worse. Behind closed doors, however, she fought tooth and nail to salvage what she could. For days, she pored over documents, searching for any loophole or lifeline that might save the situation. That's when she stumbled upon it, the clause buried deep within the fine print of the original agreement. A single sentence, innocuous at first glance, but devastating in its implications. If triggered, it could cost the company millions, and destroy its reputation overnight. Claire's heart sank as realization dawned. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a calculated move. Someone higher up had deliberately overlooked the clause, either out of ignorance or malice, and now they were scrambling to cover their tracks. Worse still, they were using her as a scapegoat, pinning the blame squarely on her shoulders to protect themselves. She confronted the CEO directly, armed with evidence and irrefutable logic. "You can't fire me," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Not until you understand what's at stake here." He laughed, a bitter hollow sound that sent chills down her spine. "Oh, I understand perfectly," he replied. "Which is why we need to cut our losses while we still can." His words hit like a punch to the gut. Cut their losses? After everything she'd done? After 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears? The injustice of it all threatened to consume her, but Claire refused to let anger cloud her judgment. Instead, she doubled down, determined to fight back against a system rigged against her. As days turned into weeks, Claire found herself increasingly isolated. Colleagues avoided eye contact in the hallways, pretending not to notice the dark circles under her eyes or the weight she'd lost from stress. Emails went unanswered, calls unreturned. Even the HR department seemed complicit in the conspiracy, stonewalling her attempts to resolve the issue internally. Each rejection fueled her resolve, pushing her closer to the edge of desperation. One evening, as she sat alone in her car outside the office building, tears streaming down her face, Claire realized she had 2 choices: give up or fight back. Giving up meant walking away quietly, letting them win, and losing everything she'd worked so hard to achieve. Fighting back meant taking on an entire corporation, risking everything she had left for a chance at justice. She chose to fight. With renewed determination, Claire began gathering allies wherever she could find them. Former colleagues who owed her favors, disgruntled employees tired of being mistreated, even clients who recognized her value, all rallied to her side, forming a loose coalition united by a shared sense of outrage. Together, they pieced together a strategy designed to expose the truth and hold those responsible accountable. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Powerful forces aligned against her, determined to crush any resistance before it gained traction. Threats arrived daily, disguised as friendly warnings or veiled ultimatums. Lawyers circled like vultures, ready to pick apart her case piece by piece. Yet through it all, Claire stood firm, driven by a fierce belief in her own righteousness. In the midst of the chaos, moments of clarity emerged unexpectedly. Late-night conversations with old friends reminded her why she'd embarked on this journey in the first place. Memories of past victories reignited the spark of hope that had nearly been extinguished. Even small acts of kindness, a stranger holding open a door, a barista remembering her usual order, served as reminders that humanity still existed amidst the madness. Still, the battle wore on, testing her strength and resolve in ways she never imagined possible. Doubts crept in during quiet moments, whispering cruel lies about failure and inadequacy. Sleep eluded her, replaced by restless tossing and turning as scenarios played out endlessly in her mind. Yet each morning, she rose again, steeling herself for another round of combat. Because somewhere deep inside, Claire knew she couldn't afford to lose. Not just for herself, but for everyone counting on her to set things right. The stakes were too high, the consequences too dire. So she fought on, one step at a time, refusing to let fear dictate her fate. Months passed in a blur of motion and emotion, each day blending seamlessly into the next. Progress came slowly, painfully, often accompanied by setbacks that threatened to derail everything. But Claire persevered, buoyed by the knowledge that she wasn't fighting alone. Around her, a movement grew, small at first, then steadily gaining momentum as more people joined the cause. Social media campaigns amplified their message, drawing attention from journalists and activists alike. Public pressure mounted, forcing the company to respond publicly, albeit reluctantly. Yet despite the growing support, victory remained elusive. Legal battles dragged on interminably, bogged down by technicalities and procedural delays. Financial strain took its toll, leaving Claire teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Exhaustion became her constant companion, gnawing at her resolve with relentless persistence. Just when it seemed like the tide might finally turn in her favor, a new obstacle emerged, one far more insidious than anything she'd faced before. An anonymous tip surfaced, implicating Claire in illegal activities related to the deal. Evidence materialized seemingly out of nowhere, damning in its specificity. Panic rippled through her team as accusations flew wildly, threatening to tear apart the fragile unity they'd worked so hard to build. Claire stared at the documents spread across her kitchen table, disbelief warring with fury. Who would do this? Why now? The questions swirled endlessly, taunting her with their lack of answers. For the first time since the ordeal began, doubt crept into her heart, planting seeds of uncertainty that threatened to take root. But giving up wasn't an option, not yet. Not while there was still breath in her body and fire in her soul. Steeling herself against the storm, Claire prepared to face whatever lay ahead, knowing full well that the hardest battles were still to come. Claire's hands trembled as she sifted through the documents accusing her of wrongdoing. Each page was a dagger aimed squarely at her integrity, filled with fabricated emails, falsified bank statements, and invoices that bore signatures eerily similar to hers but were undeniably forged. Whoever had orchestrated this attack knew exactly how to twist the truth into something unrecognizable. It wasn't just about discrediting her, it was about destroying her completely. Her mind raced, trying to piece together who could be behind it. The CEO? He had every reason to silence her before she exposed the buried clause that would cost the company millions. Or perhaps someone higher up, someone whose name hadn't even surfaced yet in all of this mess. She thought about the board members, their smug expressions during meetings where they dismissed her concerns without a second glance. Any one of them could have pulled strings to bury her under this avalanche of lies. But Claire refused to let fear paralyze her. Instead, she channeled her anger into action. That night, she called an emergency meeting with her closest allies, a small group of former colleagues, investigative journalists, and tech-savvy friends who had been instrumental in helping her fight back. They gathered in her cramped apartment, laptops open and phones buzzing with updates from supporters online. The air crackled with urgency. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Claire said, pacing the room like a caged animal. Her voice was steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Whoever did this wants us to fold. To panic. To give up. But we're not going to do that." One of her allies, a sharp-eyed journalist named Marcus, leaned forward. "I've seen cases like this before. This isn't just about ruining your reputation, it's about creating enough chaos to distract from the real issue. That clause you found? It's still our strongest weapon. If we can prove it exists and show how they deliberately ignored it, none of this other stuff will matter." Claire nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we focus on two things, proving the forgery and exposing the clause. We split up the work. I'll handle digging deeper into the legal side, you guys keep pushing the narrative publicly. People are starting to listen. We can't let them lose faith now." The next few days blurred into a frenzy of activity. Claire spent hours poring over old contracts, retracing every step of the deal to find inconsistencies or clues that might lead her to the source of the forgery. Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly to track down the origins of the leaked documents, enlisting the help of cybersecurity experts to analyze metadata and identify potential leaks within the company. As the investigation unfolded, patterns began to emerge. Several of the falsified emails originated from IP addresses linked to corporate servers, evidence that pointed directly to someone inside the organization. Armed with this information, Claire drafted a formal complaint to regulatory authorities, demanding an independent audit of the company's internal communications. It was a risky move. If nothing came of it, she risked alienating what little goodwill remained among her supporters. But she couldn't afford to hesitate, not when the stakes were this high. Publicly, the campaign gained traction faster than anyone expected. Hashtags like #JusticeForClaire and #ExposeTheTruth trended on social media, drawing attention from major news outlets. Protesters gathered outside the company's headquarters, holding signs that read "Accountability Now" and "Stop Corporate Corruption." Employees spoke out anonymously, sharing stories of unethical practices and systemic mistreatment. For the first time, the tide seemed to be turning in Claire's favor. Yet with each victory came new challenges. Anonymous trolls flooded comment sections with vitriol, accusing Claire of orchestrating the entire scandal for attention. Threats escalated, targeting not only her but also her family and friends. One evening, as she walked home from a late-night strategy session, a car slowed beside her, its occupants shouting obscenities before speeding off into the night. Claire froze, heart pounding, before forcing herself to keep moving. Fear lingered like a shadow, always present but never quite touching her. Despite the danger, she pressed on. Every setback only fueled her determination to see this through to the end. Late nights turned into early mornings as she juggled legal filings, media appearances, and endless rounds of phone calls with her team. Exhaustion gnawed at her edges, but she refused to slow down. There was too much at stake. Then, just as momentum seemed unstoppable, disaster struck again. A whistleblower emerged, not on Claire's side, but against her. A mid-level employee claiming to have witnessed Claire engaging in suspicious behavior during the final stages of the deal went public with allegations that contradicted everything she'd fought so hard to defend. Overnight, headlines shifted, painting her as manipulative and dishonest. Doubt seeped back into the public consciousness, eroding the trust she'd worked so hard to build. Claire felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. She locked herself in her apartment for hours, staring blankly at the wall as waves of despair crashed over her. How could she fight something she couldn't see? How could she prove her innocence when the very system designed to protect her seemed determined to tear her apart? It was Marcus who finally broke through her haze. He showed up unannounced, carrying coffee and a folder stuffed with fresh evidence. "You don't get to quit," he said firmly, setting the folder on the table. "Not now. Not after everything you've done. Look at this." Inside the folder were transcripts of encrypted messages between senior executives discussing ways to discredit Claire. One message stood out in particular: "If we frame her for fraud, no one will believe anything she says about the clause." The words hit like a punch to the gut. This was it, the smoking gun they'd been searching for. Tears pricked at the corners of Claire's eyes, but she blinked them away. "They really think they can get away with this," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "They won't," Marcus replied. "Not if we play our cards right." With renewed purpose, Claire and her team devised a plan to release the incriminating messages alongside a detailed timeline of events leading up to the scandal. They reached out to trusted journalists, ensuring the story would break simultaneously across multiple platforms. Timing was critical. They needed to strike while public interest was still high, before the whistleblower's claims could gain further traction. The night before the release, Claire sat alone in her living room, staring at the clock as it ticked closer to midnight. Her phone buzzed incessantly with last-minute updates and words of encouragement from supporters, but she barely registered them. All she could think about was the weight of tomorrow, the culmination of months of struggle, sacrifice, and sheer willpower. She thought about the people who had stood by her through it all: Marcus, whose relentless pursuit of the truth had kept her grounded; her former colleagues, who risked their careers to speak out; strangers who had donated money, shared posts, and rallied behind her cause. And then there were those who hadn't: friends who had distanced themselves, family members who questioned whether it was worth it, enemies who sought to drag her name through the mud. For a moment, doubt crept in again. What if it wasn't enough? What if the world decided she was guilty anyway? But as quickly as the thought surfaced, it dissolved, replaced by a quiet certainty. She had done everything she could. She had fought with everything she had. Whatever happened next was out of her hands. As dawn broke over the city skyline, Claire took a deep breath and opened her laptop. The first headlines were already rolling in, accompanied by videos of protests erupting outside corporate offices worldwide. Social media exploded with reactions, some supportive, others skeptical, but all talking about her. About the clause. About justice. And for the first time in months, Claire allowed herself a small smile. The days following the release of the incriminating messages felt like a whirlwind. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story, dissecting every detail and amplifying Claire's fight for accountability. The public outrage was palpable, with hashtags like #ExposeTheTruth trending worldwide once again, but this time, they were accompanied by demands for corporate reform. Protesters swelled in numbers outside the company's headquarters, their chants echoing through city streets as cameras captured it all. Inside the boardroom, panic spread like wildfire. Phone calls flew back and forth between executives, lawyers, and PR teams desperate to contain the fallout. But it was too late. The evidence was undeniable. A coordinated effort to frame Claire Monroe had been exposed, and the company's leadership was caught red-handed. Shareholders began calling for resignations, while regulators launched investigations into not only the forged documents but also years of unethical practices that had gone unchecked. Claire watched it all unfold from her tiny apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cups and stacks of papers chronicling her journey. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to exhale. It wasn't just relief, it was vindication. Every sleepless night, Every tear shed in frustration, every moment of doubt had led to this. She hadn't just fought for herself, she'd struck a blow against a system designed to crush people like her. One by one, the dominoes fell. First came the resignation of the CEO, his carefully crafted image shattered beyond repair. Then, key members of the executive team followed suit, their careers ruined by their own greed and hubris. Regulatory bodies imposed hefty fines on the company, forcing them to restructure entirely. And finally, after weeks of legal wrangling, the clause Claire had uncovered, the one they had tried so desperately to bury, was officially acknowledged as valid. Its enforcement cost the company millions, wiping out profits from the very deal they had sought to exploit. But for Claire, the most satisfying moment came when an independent arbitrator ruled in her favor regarding the $2.4 million commission. Not only did she receive the payment she had earned, but the ruling publicly affirmed her innocence, clearing her name once and for all. When the check arrived, a symbolic gesture more than anything else, she held it in her hands for a long time before tucking it away. The money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the truth. In the aftermath, life slowly began to return to normal, or at least, a new version of it. Claire stepped away from corporate life altogether, choosing instead to focus on mentoring others who found themselves facing similar battles. She started a non-profit organization dedicated to advocating for workplace transparency and accountability, using her experience to help others navigate systems stacked against them. Her story became a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. Marcus stayed by her side throughout it all, transitioning from journalist to close friend and confidant. Together, they wrote a book detailing the scandal, donating proceeds to support whistleblowers and victims of corporate misconduct. The book became a bestseller, sparking conversations about ethics and integrity in industries long plagued by corruption. As for the company, its reputation never fully recovered. Former employees spoke openly about the toxic culture that had enabled such behavior, leading to widespread reforms across the industry. New legislation was introduced to protect workers from retaliation, inspired in part by Claire's relentless pursuit of justice. On a crisp autumn morning months later, Claire stood on a stage in front of a packed auditorium. She had been invited to speak at a conference focused on corporate accountability, and though she initially hesitated to accept, something inside her urged her to say yes. Looking out at the sea of faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, all listening intently, she felt a surge of gratitude. "I didn't set out to change the world," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind it. "I just wanted to do my job, to work hard, play fair, and earn what I deserved. But when the system failed me, I realized that staying silent wasn't an option. Fighting back wasn't just about saving myself, it was about standing up for everyone who's ever been told they're powerless." The crowd erupted into applause, but Claire barely heard it. Her gaze drifted to the back of the room, where Marcus sat grinning proudly, surrounded by friends and allies who had stood by her through thick and thin. Beyond them, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden light over everything. For the first time in years, Claire felt truly free. And as she stepped off the stage to thunderous cheers, she knew one thing for certain: no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always have the strength to face them head-on. Because she had already proven, to herself and to the world, that even the mightiest walls could crumble under the weight of truth.